right, guys, we are back with another episode, and today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic, and that is psychedelics and substances just in general, and what the Bible has to say about these substances. Anyway, let's get started. So the question is, does the Bible have anything to say about things like psychedelics, DMT, mushrooms, ayahuasca, etc.? And the answer is yes, but it doesn't directly state these substances. The word that the Bible uses for these types of substances is actually the word sorcery. Now, when many of you guys think of the word sorcery or magic or witchcraft, you often think of things like Harry Potter, right? Spells and wands and stuff like that. But the Bible definitions for these things are a little different. Sorcery, witchcraft, is from the Greek word pharmakia, the same word where we get pharmacy from. It means the general illicit use of drugs, same application as today, and the use of drugs to cast spells. The word that's often used in the Bible is the word sorcery, and it comes from the Greek word pharmakia. It's where we get words like pharmacy, pharmaceuticals, pharma, and it means sorcery and witchcraft. Pharmakia, sorcery and witchcraft. Ecstasy, rave drug, dancing death, MDMA, methamphetamine, marijuana, hash, pot, joint, I can't pronounce some of these, THC, magic mushrooms, psilocybin, shrooms, etc. You guys get the point. So the word for sorcery, witchcraft, magic in the Bible is pharmakia. So things like psychedelics, mushrooms, DMT, ayahuasca would be categorized under pharmakia. Another thing I wanted to mention is, now the Bible talks about sorcery, and as I stated in the beginning, sorcery is another word for pharmakia. And pharmakia is basically the use of substances like psychedelics, DMT, ayahuasca. However, the 66-book version of the Bible we have today, the canon, the modern canon, does not exactly talk about the origins of who taught man how to use these substances and where to get them. However, the first book of Enoch, which was found with the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I think is a pretty reasonable reason to look into that book. So this is Enoch chapter 7, verse 1. And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go into unto them, and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. So this is talking about substance abuse and things like psychedelics, ayahuasca, which is used by tribal people in South America, which is the psychedelic tea that they drink. The Bible forbids us to participate in these substances, and there's a very good reason for it, because when partaking in these substances, it opens you up to the demonic realm, to the spiritual world. The pagan ancient world, and even today, often every pagan society had like a spiritual leader or like a shaman, or Egypt had their priests, and often they would all partake in pharmakia, psychedelics, or other substances, and communicate with the so-called gods, and these gods would tell them to do different things like, oh, if you want a good harvest this season, you need to do this and sacrifice this many people and do this and that and these rituals. Like even today, there are some tribes throughout the world, like in Siberia and other places throughout the world, where their spiritual teachers, the shamans, partake in psychedelics. They get into this trance and they communicate with the so-called spirits, or what the Bible would refer to them as demons. So like I said, the reason the Bible forbids the partaking in these substances is because it opens you up to the demonic realm. One thing that's very interesting about substance abuse, specifically psychedelics, is often people who have schizophrenia develop it after partaking in psychedelics and having experiences with substances like psychedelics or methamphetamine, or things like spiced weed, ayahuasca, DMT, etc. And I'm going to talk about some of these experiences that I know about. So for those of you who have been with me on my channel for quite a while, you know that I did a podcast with a friend that I met on TikTok who's had schizophrenia for many years. And if you guys haven't seen that podcast, I urge you to go check it out. It's very intriguing and thought-provoking. But I had a great conversation with a guy named ExoRadMagical. That's his TikTok username, or that's his artist name. So he's had schizophrenia for many years, and on his TikTok, he talks about his experience with schizophrenia and what it's actually like having schizophrenia versus what the media says and what he believes he has. And his view on schizophrenia is more spiritual than the modern medical view of just having a chemical imbalance in the brain. So his entire channel is dedicated to him showing people what it's like having schizophrenia, because he's also an animator and he animates and makes simulations of what it's like day to day having schizophrenia, what he sees and what he hears, and he talks about what he feels. His onset of schizophrenia started after partaking in substances. He actually talked about one of his experiences with some of these substances known as DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and him going into a whole nother dimension. And he gave this one really interesting experience that he saw, and he said when he was in this DMT dimension, he referred to it as hyperspace. He said he encountered this interesting purple lady entity. And I've done a decent amount of research into DMT, but I rarely ever heard anything about a purple lady entity. But apparently many people who have taken DMT describe seeing the same exact thing, a feminine purple entity. And what he said, and while he was in this dimension, he said that this purple entity approached him and started doing all kinds of weird things.
There's nothing like it in this world. And so I was in there and I was looking around and I looked over and there was this purple entity that was a lady. And she came out of nowhere and she turned into a fractal of infinite stuff. Like, she just kept showing me, like, you know, here's a suitcase, here's like a piece of like toilet paper or what. Like, it didn't matter. It was just saying, look, I'm making all of this. And it said, you can do this too. And you're trying to evolve to become us one day. And that freaked.
From my interpretation of what this purple entity was saying, according to Exorad Magical's experience, is he was stating that this entity was basically telling him, you will be a god as well, creating matter out of thin air. Sounds very familiar to what the serpent said in the Garden of Eden. That's just one experience I know of where messing around with psychedelics led to him opening himself up to the spiritual world. Another very interesting experience I can tell you about is concerning a good friend of mine, and everything about the story that I'm going to tell you is 100% true, and this happened, if I can remember right, about 4 years ago. So anyway, my friend used to smoke weed, and about 4 years ago, he bought some weed off this guy, and apparently the weed that he bought was known as spiced weed, or K2. Now, spiced weed is basically marijuana with added man-made chemicals that has very psychoactive properties. So anyway, my friend buys weed off this guy, doesn't realize that it's spiced weed, and he takes the substance. And then after taking it, he started going through some interesting changes. He started seeing things that weren't there. He started hearing things that weren't there. He started feeling things that weren't there. And he just started doing very odd stuff. Like this one time, he came out of his house and he just went in front of his house and started staring at the sun for no reason. So he was going through these bizarre changes and his mom was really worried for him. So his mom takes him to the hospital to figure out what was wrong. And the doctors at the hospital diagnosed him with drug-induced psychosis. So for those of you who don't know what psychosis is, it's basically a mental disorder characterized by a disconnection from reality. Psychosis may occur as a result of psychiatric illness like schizophrenia. In other instances, it may be caused by a health condition, medication, or drug use. So like I said, what triggered his psychosis was partaking in the spiced weed. So as he was in the hospital, he was diagnosed with psychosis, and there was this one incident where I believe he started seeing things and hearing things or seeing like demonic things, and he started to run away in the hospital. I assume because he was like terrified of something that he saw or heard. And according to him, he got tackled by security guards, and he actually started fighting the security guards. I'm not sure why. It might be because he was hallucinating and he started seeing them as demons or something and just hearing things. Again, during this time, he was going through severe psychosis. So he starts fighting the security guards and they choke him out. And he basically gets sedated. So the next day, he gets released from the hospital, he gets to go home, and me and my friend heard about all this, that he had drug-induced psychosis, and we decided to take him out and buy him some food and just have a talk with him to make sure our friend is okay. So we take him to this one sushi spot, we get some food, and he's just telling us all his bizarre experiences, exactly what I just told you guys, about his drug-induced psychosis from partaking in spiced weed, and seeing things and hearing things and feeling things that weren't there. So we're talking about all this at the restaurant. We finish and we decide to leave. And there was this car parking garage right across the street from the sushi restaurant that we went to. And we decide to go to the highest floor to just chill at the very top and just talk about his experiences and just look at the views. Anyway, we're at the very top at the car parking garage and we're just kind of leaning on the edge and looking down at the views. And as he's telling us his experiences, we're all talking. He looks down from the car parking garage and then he looks at us and he says, "You know, voices are telling me to jump right now." And I hear that and I'm like, what? And I'm just in pure shock and my eyes are lit up. And I look at my other friend just in complete disbelief and I'm like, so we grab him and I'm like, yeah, buddy, we're going down. But yeah, that's the story. That whole experience was crazy. That he started hearing things and seeing, that he started hallucinating and hearing voices. But I just spoke to him not too long ago and he seems good. He's married right now and I think he understands that what he went through was a spiritual experience, and what he was going through was spiritual oppression as a result of taking that spiced weed. So yeah, crazy story. Now, with those two stories in mind, I want to get into a psychotherapist known as Dr. Jerry Marzinsky. And he's been a psychotherapist for more than 35 years, close to 40. So he's a psychotherapist, and he's dealt with all kinds of patients, like patients with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, multiple personality disorder. And he used to be an atheist, and he subscribed to the idea that schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, that these were just simply chemical imbalances in the brain. In fact, that's what's accepted by the main narrative today. However, he had this one very interesting experience with one of his clients that got him to change his mind, and he realized that these voices weren't just a result of chemical imbalances in the brain, but he now believes these are spiritual parasites, that these are real demonic entities.
So he comes in, he sits down, and I said, well, what is it they have to say? And I'll never forget this. You know, his voice tone changes just a little bit lower, and these words come out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. And I'm like, bam. And he said, that wasn't me saying that. And I'm like, what the blazes is going on here?
One of the books that he wrote is called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. Psychiatry maintains the voices of schizophrenics here are meaningless auditory hallucinations caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. Clinical investigation to the matter reveals this to be a false claim. Dr. Wilson Van Dusen, a clinical psychologist and author of The Presence of the Spirit and Madness, began holding coherent conversation with the voices of his schizophrenic patients decades ago. He discovered they precisely matched what Christian mystic Emanuel Swedenborg described as an evil spirit. Following up with scores of investigation interviews with the schizophrenic patients, Jerry Marzinsky, a psychiatric evaluator, verified Van Dusen's astonishing conclusion. The voices are real. They are conscious parasitic entities, aka demons. And I'm going to read to you some more things that... And Jerry Marzinsky has his own website, and I'm going to read to you some more things that he talks about. He has this very beautiful quote on his website, and I absolutely love it because it's so true. When an honest man discovers he is mistaken, he will either cease to be mistaken or cease to be honest. We are very different in what we bring to the table. We're all working for the same thing. We're working for us to become better people and create a better world. Greg Brandon. Welcome to my website. So this is Gary Marzinsky. I'm a retired licensed psychotherapist. I explore and write about the phenomena of non-physical beings that plague individuals and disrupt their lives. My research has led to methods of helping people come to terms with their malicious inner voices they hear, to show them what these voices really are. 3 decades ago, I saw an article labeled "Demons for Real." I would have scoffed, "Oh really?" Now, after what I experienced in my 35 years on the front lines with patients suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, there is no doubt in my mind that these entities exist. I've both seen and spoken to them, and they are very nasty. It turns out that schizophrenics are not having hallucinations when they hear voices. They are being attacked by real, living, invisible entities, conscious of what they are doing. My articles and videos go into detail, and I encourage you to read and watch. Once I knew what was happening to my patients and showed them the truth about what their voices were, both the patients and I became a threat and a target to these entities. You see, these entities feed off negative energy. If they can trick you into feeling anxiety, fear, or any other form of stress that turns your emotions negative, they can feast from you. By the way, this is very true because I had my own supernatural experience with this, and I see now that there's a reason God says not to give in to fear or anxiety in the Bible. It says that a spirit of fear is not from God, and if it's not from God, it comes from another place. And there was a time in 2020 to 2021 where I was experiencing severe disassociations, which now I believe were caused by spiritual parasites, aka demons, because during this time I give in to a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, and it often caused me to have disassociative episodes for almost a year, from 2020 to 2021. And I'll make a testimony video about this, getting into more detail of what it's like having disassociations and why I had it and where I even started, or why I even make these videos. I'm going to make a full testimony video about all this. But basically, for those of you guys who don't know what disassociations are, it feels as if you're inside of a dream. Your emotions are completely turned off. You don't feel depression. You don't feel sadness. You feel absolutely nothing. You feel numb. And you feel like you're in a glass bubble inside of a dream. In fact, I made the simulation of what it feels like to have a strong dissociative episodes. And this simulation is as close as I can get to an example of what it feels like going through severe dissociations because of anxiety and fear. But anyway, I'll get into more detail on a testimony video that I'll make later, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, back to Jerry Marzinski's website. In one case, a patient I'd never seen before reported his voices warned him to stay away from me the moment I walked into the emergency room. In another case, a patient who was improving told me his voices wanted to speak with me. What the voices told me was this: you have no right to interfere with our way of life. Providing people with knowledge of the existence of this menace and how they manifest in our lives is the last thing these energy parasites want. They want you to go on believing that in the age of science, demons are fictional, a maniacal throwback to medieval and prehistoric days, tales of the uneducated. They are thrilled that you ignore the 25 or more times the Bible depicts Jesus casting out demons. They are even more pleased when you view the Bible as irrelevant to this issue. They prefer you to believe that science is God and demons don't exist. So anyway, that was Jerry Marzinski. And like I said, this guy isn't some conspiracy theorist living in his mom's basement. He is a licensed professional. He is a real psychotherapist, and he's been one for more than 35 years. So he has solid experience, he has credentials, and he had a change of mind concerning spirituality, and he realized these voices that his patients were hearing were actual entities. By the way, if you would like to support this channel, I do have a Patreon. The link is in the bio. I appreciate you guys so much for watching, and we are out.